Hi, I'm Martin Austwick. So, Thanksgiving is just around the corner, Christmas is just around the corner, Harvest Festival is just around the corner, Sunday is just around the corner, and whatever the occasion, cooking a big roast meal for a group of friends or family can be stressful. Maybe you're roasting a big bird, like a turkey or a goose or a chicken, but even if you're not, there's bound to be tons of things you're doing at the same time. You might be steaming some carrots, you might be chopping up and cleaning some potatoes so you can boil them and turn them into mash. Maybe you're boiling some sprouts, maybe you're making some gravy, maybe you're wrapping little sausages up in bacon, maybe you're making stuffing balls, maybe you're roasting a swede, maybe you're cooking a leek in a cheesy sauce. And all of these things have to come together at the right time so that the meal comes together at the same moment. That's pretty stressful. Well, what would you say if I told you that there's one thing that could completely remove that stress? Okay, well, what would you say if I said that there were multiple small things that would somewhat reduce that stress? I mean, hopefully you'd say thank you. This is what we're going to do today. We are going to take some of the stress out of cooking a roast meal using the power of data visualization. I'm an audio producer and a musician, but not so long ago I used to teach data visualization. And I think my greatest contribution to the field is not something I taught my students, it's not something I even shared with my colleagues or published in academic journals. It's called the DGAF diagram. That stands for Dinner, Gant, Austwick, Feynman diagram. The DGAF diagram combines perhaps two of the most famous data visualizations, the Gant Chart and the Feynman diagram. And I've thrown Austwick in there as well because, a little finder's fee, something to wet my beak. I think I've earned it. I'm using roast chicken with roast potatoes as an example to illustrate this method. You don't have to cook or eat chicken. You don't even have to cook or eat meat. I'm choosing meat as an example because it takes a long time, it takes a lot of space, and you have to cook it thoroughly so you don't make people sick. If you're vegetarian or vegan, good on you. The DGAF diagram still works for vegetarian and vegan meals. So let's talk about the parts that make up the DGAF diagram. We'll talk about the Feynman diagram in a second, but first of all, let's talk about the Gant chart. Gant charts were invented by Henry Gant in the 1910s. He was a tailorist. He subscribed to the school of scientific management, this very top-down sort of mechanistic way of looking at the organisation of factories that was popular in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Now look at us, we can take the means of production and use it to cook ourselves a nice lunch. Let's start by looking at how we would plan a roast dinner using a Gant chart. A Gant chart is pretty straightforward. It takes time, which runs from left to right, and in this example I'm going to assume we're serving up at 2 p.m. That's when we want the food to be ready, so everything else is working back from that. So we can see when all of the other things need to happen in order that the whole meal comes together at 2 o'clock. So in this example we're cooking chicken, and then we need to prepare the chicken, cook it and rest it. But we're going to work back from the finish time. So we're going to rest the meat for 15 minutes at the end. Before that we're going to cook it in the oven for 2.5 hours, and before that we're going to allow ourselves 15 minutes for preparation, putting herbs and things on the chicken, maybe stuffing. So we start preparing the chicken at 11 o'clock, put it in the oven at 11:15, and we take it out at about 1:45. In these diagrams you can also show dependencies. These little arrows say this thing needs to happen before this thing. So we have to prepare the chicken before we roast it, and we have to roast the chicken before we rest it. This is quite simple, but when we start to add other elements it gets more complicated. So let's say potatoes. Potatoes we're going to parboil them for 20 minutes and then roast them for an hour. So if we were doing this a bit more thoroughly, we might allocate some time for, like, how long does it take the water to get hot? Do we have to peel the potatoes if we didn't do it last night? Are we going to rest them for a bit and fluff them up before we put them in the oven? Lots of tricks that families have for making really nice roast potatoes. And then you label all of those up basically. This isn't too bad, but I don't find the way of showing dependencies very clean. If you want to show that you have to chop the potatoes before you boil them, there's a little arrow there, but it's hard to see. And there's no kind of symbology. When we talk about Feynman diagrams, we'll see a bit more what I mean about that. So let's do that. Richard Feynman was a theoretical physicist of the last century. He was a very talented physicist who was a gifted educator, and he had some terrible views on sexual politics and women, so be warned if you're going to Google him. Now, we're interested in him because he was a theoretical physicist who invented Feynman diagrams to communicate the very complicated maths that sat underneath them, which was the mathematics of relativistic quantum mechanics. Now, I have a PhD which includes quantum mechanics, and this stuff is way above my pay grade. So we're not going to talk about the physics that underlies Firan diagrams in any great detail. I'm also going to simplify the way that Firan diagrams are drawn, because there are some aspects that are a bit strange unless you understand the underlying physics, which I don't. So I'm going to simplify and think about a Firan diagram as something which tracks the interaction and evolution of subatomic particles through time, how they combine, annihilate, create and destroy. Now this is very much a simplified Firan diagram that I drew earlier. Like with Gant charts, time moves from left to right. And what's happening is as time moves forward, this particle and this antiparticle, an electron and a positron, combine to form a photon. That's what this gamma symbol represents, and this squiggly line. And that photon exists for a little while, and then at a later point in time it splits again back into a positron and into an electron, and they go their separate ways. The diagram is telling you a few interesting things about the combination of these particles in time, but it's also telling you something about the nature of these particles. A straight line represents a certain kind of particle. In this example, an electron or a positron, and the wiggly line represents a different kind of particle, in this case a photon of light. So in a Firan diagram, straight lines describe particles called fermions, wiggly lines describe particles called bosons, and that means at a glance you can immediately tell something about the physical system it's describing. That's the strength of the symbology. Now, we're not dealing with subatomic particles, we're dealing with cooking. So we can add our own symbology to the diagrams that we're creating. And you can add your own, you don't have to use the one that I've done. So for my DGF diagrams, we've got three types of lines. A straight line, which represents preparation, chopping up vegetables, weighing out ingredients, stuffing meat. We've got a wiggly line, which represents cooking things on a hob, frying, boiling, making sauces and gravies. And we've got a jagged line, which represents things cooked in the oven, roasting, baking, and so on. Okay, so this is our DGAF diagram. Again, we're going to have a time axis running along the bottom, and we're going to have these lines in place which show when all of the things need to happen. So we're roasting a chicken, working back from 2 p.m. like we did before. It needs to rest for 15 minutes, so I'm just going to have a sort of dotted line for resting, because we don't have to do very much there, but maybe it takes up some space. Prior to that, we're going to roast it for 2.5 hours in the oven. And before that, we need to season it and heat the oven, so that takes a few minutes. So the roast potatoes, we want to roast them in the oven for an hour, and prior to that we want to parboil them for 20 minutes. And before we've parboiled them, we also need to wash and peel them, so let's put that in as well. Well, this is pretty fun, but what else might we want to do? Well, we can make some gravy. Just as we take the chicken out, we pour off the juice and use that for our gravy. So there we go, that needs a few minutes on the hob with other ingredients, and we probably need to keep an eye on it. Maybe we'd like to roast some leeks. I don't know how long leeks take to roast, but let's give them a bit over an hour in with the chicken. They won't get too dry. So sometime after 12, I'll throw them in with the chicken. And again, a bit of prep time. So you can see you just keep adding elements to this as it gets more complicated. What if we want to do cauliflower cheese? Well, we'll need to bake that in the oven for about 45 minutes, but we'll also need to steam the cauliflower a little bit and prepare a cheese sauce. And that'll take a little bit of preparation, cutting up the cauliflower and weighing out the ingredients and things like that. And if it's a traditional British Christmas dinner, you want to boil the sprouts for at least 3 hours. The strength of this diagram is that it tracks individual processes. You can see all of the bits I need to do to roast my chicken or roast my potatoes, but it also, I can follow at any particular point in time and see what I need to be doing and what I'm about to start doing. And just before 1 p.m, let's say, right? The chicken's already in, so are the leeks. I can forget about those for the moment. The potatoes are finished parboiling, and I need to get them in the oven if I've not already done that. That's what I need to be doing at 1 o'clock. But we also know that at any time, how much kitchen space is being used. Is the oven full? Do I need counter space for preparation or plating? Am I using all my hobs for making gravy and steaming things? Do I need more space for my sprouts? So however complicated the meal is, you can take the stress out of the process using this DGF diagram to plan and execute your meal. If DGAF diagram is a bit of a mouthful, you could just call it an Austwick diagram. Firan and Gant aren't going to care. They're dead. If you do try this, I would genuinely love to see your diagrams and hear how it turned out. So I'm on the socials at Martin Austwick. Drop me a line there. And until then, good luck cooking.